Hi friends, it's Margaret from Great Salt Bay School again, and I want to show you the basil plant today, and I believe the Farm's Kitchen is going to be making some pesto. So you can actually make pesto with just about any leafy green, or you can mix it. You could do a pesto with a kale or basil or cilantro. There's all kinds of ways you can do it. But today I want to show you the traditional plant and herb used for pesto. So this is a basil plant. It's been growing for a while, and I'm going to put it in the ground pretty soon. And a lot of you have seen this before. And the cool thing about basil is that you can harvest the leaves. So I'm going to take the top off this one right here. And we can use that for cooking. And then right here, this will grow 2 new tops. So by harvesting the top of the plant, it's actually going to grow bushier. So you could do that throughout the summer if you have basil growing, and you can get actually a lot more leaf material out of it. But basil is very fragrant. A lot of times people use it for pastas or pizza, and it will eventually flower and form a seed. So this is what basil seed looks like. Pretty tiny. And basil grows relatively quickly, so I usually start batches of it throughout the summer. So I showed you this bigger plant already. These are basil seedlings that just germinated last week, so you can see that this is the smaller version of them. They're cotyledons and they're first true leaves. So those will grow up quite a bit, and then by the end of the summer, we'll have all kinds of basil leaves for pesto making, and it freezes really nicely, so you can eat pesto in the summer. Have fun cooking.
Thanks, Margaret, for teaching us all about basil and what it looks like as a seed and when it grows. Basil is one of my favorite herbs to work with because it's so easy to grow, and like Margaret said, when you pluck the top of the basil plant, it just keeps growing even more. I'm Leslie from Farms at the Y, and like Margaret said, we're gonna make some pesto with basil today. Before we get started, please always make sure to wash your hands at least for 20 seconds with warm soap and water, and wash all your vegetables that need a washing beforehand. So I've already washed my hands, we'll get started. Traditionally, pesto is made with basil and only basil as the leafy green, but I have some spinach in my refrigerator today, and I'm gonna use a combination of spinach and basil. You can also use other greens like kale and Swiss chard to make your pesto. It's a very flexible recipe. We're also gonna use garlic today. It's got that papery outside, and we'll take some cloves off. I've got Parmesan cheese, which gives it a nice, yummy, salty flavor. If for some reason you don't want to use cheese, you can also use nutritional yeast, which is this fine yellowish powder, and it has kind of a cheesy odor and flavor, and you can use that as well. If you're in Damascotta area, you can find it at Rising Tide in the bulk section. Nuts are also the next thing that goes in. I have pecans in my fridge. A traditional pesto is made with pine nuts, but I don't have those, so I'm using pecans today. Whatever nuts you have, preferably like a walnut, a cashew, an almond, pretty much any nut. Peanuts might not work so well. And we've got our olive oil, so an oil to kind of give it that kind of wet sauce-like consistency. So let's get started. First, you're going to want to take your basil leaves off the stem, and you can just do that by plucking them and breaking the stem right at the base where the leaf meets the stem. That'll go for a little bit. Like I said, we washed our greens, so I just washed my spinach. That's ready to go. Next, the recipe has us use some garlic. So make sure that you're taking the papery outside off of your garlic, and you're going to want to crush the garlic first, and you can do that with a knife or your hands, and that breaks the clove and makes it easier to take off this papery outside. And there's the pointy part of the garlic and then the bottom, and you just want to slice off the bottom there, and I can even do that with my fingernails. We're going to want to grate the cheese and toast our nuts, and so let's go do that. Okay, so let's grate our Parmesan. I've got a box grater here with lots of different sized holes, and I want to go with the smallest, finest hole for our Parmesan. Always remember to keep your fingers tucked in and so they don't touch the sharp part of the grater. And you're just moving your cheese in an up and down motion. And you can always stop and reposition your fingers so they don't get too close. The recipe calls for about a half a cup. Okay, that looks good. For our nuts, I have the oven on, and I'm just gonna put them on a small cookie sheet and toast them, just to bring out that nice nutty flavor. The recipe calls for about 1/4 cup. So let's get those in the oven. All right, so our nuts are toasted and cooling there, and all of our ingredients are prepped to go into the food processor. So I have my food processor over here. That's an appliance that can blend things really well. You can also use a blender if you have it, and if you don't have an appliance like that, you could chop all of these ingredients on a cutting board really fine. So the recipe has us start by getting our greens in the blender with our salt, and pulsing, which is the button that makes the blade spin just quickly, and chopping them finely. So the leaves are chopped up fairly fine, and we're gonna add our garlic and our nuts and our oil, and we'll add our cheese last. And if you need to taste as you go along to see if anything needs adjusting, I usually adjust the amount of oil I put in just to make sure it's the right consistency. So let's add our garlic and our nuts and our oil. I always like to pause and scrape down the sides with my scraping spatula. And we're ready for our cheese. All right, our pesto is all done. It keeps for a long time. You can also freeze it. And the advice is when you freeze it in the stage before you add your cheese. So everything else combined except cheese. And like Margaret mentioned, pesto is delicious on pasta, but it can be used as a spread on a sandwich, and it can be used as a dip for carrot sticks and other cut veggies. I hope you had a fun time learning about basil plants and how they grow, and I hope you can enjoy the recipe with some pesto. Thanks and bye.